I want to move forward then to how do those trust elements, how we can accelerate digital by thinking about the customer, the technology, and the culture for change to drive that change and trust. So first of all, I think a challenge that we often have is that we don't think about the customers, particularly in the blockchain space that I work in. We are often building self-interested solutions and relying on a lot of hype to get you to production. But hype is not going to get you to production or sustainable adoption. And efficiencies that benefit you but don't benefit your customers are also not going to get adoption. And a really good example is around greenfield and brownfield type solutions. So anyone that's been in the blockchain game long enough is aware that building brownfield solutions where you're trying to basically shift financial services onto a blockchain is not going to cut it. There are many, many years of efficiencies built into those systems, and they're hardwired into the network's processes. So that decoupling is very hard, and the ROI just about always fails. What is important and where the direction is of most financial institutions that we work with is that products must achieve something new. And particularly when we think about capital markets, what is that? If I moved debt capital markets onto a blockchain, when you really unpack it, you've got the same capital, you have probably reduced amount of investors because you have to have a node to participate in the network, it's harder, and you're ultimately selling the same thing. It just, some efficiency benefits, but frankly for the customer, let's say a buy-side participant, they don't care. So where we think the market is definitely going is towards more tapping into new capital pools, and that's the crypto side. We have a lot of new wealth, a lot of new investor types, and we have new risk profiles, we have volatility, we have price, information asymmetry. That's the kind of thing that buy-sides thrive off, and we're seeing more and more that firms, mainstream firms, and I think you'll see this come mid-next year, are working on solutions that cater more to tapping into that public blockchain world. Finally, education engagement helps drive trust. So firms are spending a lot of time ensuring that their customers are part of the journey so that they get the familiarity and know why they're meant to participate in this in the first game. Definitely if you listen to in the first place, if you listen to the ASX guys talk about the new blockchain solution they're deploying with digital assets, it's a huge challenge for them. It's how do we get others to participate in our solution when we all thought blockchain was a disintermediator. We're applying it as a central actor top down. And how do we minimize the effort that those participants have to put up to participate in what is essentially the Australian Stock Exchange's vision, not anyone else's. Then we think more around technology delivery. How can we deliver solutions in a way that accelerates digital in a sustainable manner? We think about that in design, in delivery, and in the infrastructure in the back end. We need to avoid wedding ourselves to particular technologies. You can always carve a point in time and say, this is my tech stack that I'm building for this solution, but it's going to change over the years, and we need pluggable components to avoid wedding ourselves to a bad technology decision or one that's no longer appropriate. We also need to avoid forecasting business features for too far out. We can certainly do it for a year or two, but it's much more beneficial to build technology that allows for strategy iteration over time rather than trying to pick everything that you want to deliver in the coming years. Moving forward to Agile DevOps, which is all the rage. As an IT consultancy, we do a huge amount of work in system integration, and our clients are always demanding Agile DevOps, which is all around constant deployment, constant iteration, and a lot of teamwork required. It's an all-hands-on-deck model, and at times it's not particularly pragmatic. We think it's useful, but we need to apply it in the right way. Often what you'll see is we'll have less clarity around requirements, or we'll be cutting corners on things like QA by constantly deploying and giving scope for functional iteration. So it needs to be carefully managed. And finally, cloud has indisputably created an environment for faster change, reduces the cost and time friction of that change by reducing the physical infrastructure requirements. But we need to be careful that trust in public and private clouds is still evolving. There are regulatory differences around the world that make this very hard, and particularly personal information is difficult to move onto the cloud for any large organization. Clients in particular are asking more recently for multi-vendor cloud solutions. Don't web me to a particular cloud provider even. And so that's where containers and other things come into play. Finally, the culture for change. We think it's very interesting seeing our clients and how they apply discipline to their innovation and digital change initiatives. Some of them are very decentralized, distributed around the organization, let the business units figure it out for themselves. Some are very centralized. And they both work, but it's really a trade-off between, do we want discipline and efficiency and corporate strategy to be centralized and control the change that we're trying to make in this organization, or do we want to let the ideas flow and create an environment where everyone can make change in our organization? Unlock the ideas of the people. What we find particularly important in the people section here, besides the obvious politics that come up in financial services, is you don't know what you don't know, and it's important to have the right people in the room to drive an appropriate culture for change. Do we centralize resources or let the business and the market solve their problems? And where should that innovation sit? So do we have central innovation teams, or do we let the business units do it themselves? We see mixed success, but generally speaking, if you centralize, you can ensure that you don't make the same mistakes over and over again. Those firms, particularly in the blockchain space, that allow all the business units around the world to determine which POCs they want to get involved in, they're the firms that tend to have 50 POCs and make the same mistakes over and over again. So you need some central direction to ensure that the firm has a position around the long-term theory of what that technology can do and the short-term pragmatism of how we can get something to market in a shorter period of time. And also that centralization ensures that we apply that consistently and without emotion is very important. But at the same time, whilst unlocking the ideas of the people, we're very careful that we need to be aware of paradigm shifts. Amazon and Uber are the most obvious examples in our day-to-day lives, but we can certainly think in finance, ETFs and passive investing has been one of those shifts that people for a long time thought they needed custom investment advice, but over time, it's particularly with the diminishing information asymmetry, passive investing is clearly taking over. So what's next? Particularly if you look at the public blockchain space, any traditional banker is going to see that it requires changes to the norms of privacy in particular, and they struggle to keep up with, I guess, what people see the value is in cryptos in particular. So an open-mindedness to change is very important too. So I just wanted to close with really a thesis on 2019 and what this all means. We think digital change is definitely going to be externally driven and outward looking. Firms need to recognize that there are customer and market and technology forces that they just cannot resist. You can build your single dealer platforms, but if the market is commoditizing, you're going to need to play ball with these industry utilities. We also think that those changing trust dynamics, any solutions that are changing the incumbent trust models are the ones that are going to have the most disruptive value for sure. But at the same time, don't expect any favors from the incumbents in trying to fight back. So I just wanted to end there, and we can pause for questions or we can move along. Anyone? Not a problem. Cool. All right. Go. Yeah, so in the blockchain space, particularly out of New York, we have been involved in a whole bunch of projects for large financial institutions. We can't really talk about those firms and their use cases, but the public ones, a lot of work around capital markets and a lot of work around self-sovereign KYC. So KYC is a good example of this trust challenge where the KYC utilities that exist today are third parties, and third parties a lot of firms don't want to trust third parties with their data, and so a blockchain solution allows us to transfer our data peer-to-peer directly to our counterparties rather than trusting a utility, and that changes some paradigms around IT security and a bunch of other things. In capital markets, I mentioned previously, we're involved in a lot of solutions that we think over time are going to start engaging with the public blockchain a lot more. Wonderful. Thanks, guys.